So your first question was, how do you describe the role of an artist in the context of emergent spiritual philosophy and the deep awake state?
Mm-hmm.
So the large part of the individual philosophy is the idea that there's a soul dimension made of images, which we're in right now. And I would say that the role of the artist is to explore that world of images. I don't mean just visual art, but ideas that you're actually exploring. So like the role of the scientist is to explore the domain of matter, which the senses open up. I think the domain of the artist is to open up the immaterial dimension and then represent it in some form through visuals or something. Becomes something which is non-material, becomes something sensory, and that's what culture is. And I think and I think the impulse behind that is to help us understand that. Is to help us understand and express it as well, not just understand it, but express it. And the other thing which is central to the ideas I have about the soul domain is that whilst the material domain is held together through causality, it's held together through narrative, through meaning. So that a great deal of art also, I feel, is about that. It's about exploring the story level of life, which is actually the most dominant level of life. It's where we exist mostly in that level. Not the causal, really, where the causal supports this narrative level. I mean, I'm interested in the story of Loki. You're meeting the story of Tim, and you're now in my story, and we're in each other's story. Yeah. And so I think that's my basic response to that. Shall I just go through, or do you want to? Shall I just keep on going through the questions?
Yes, but I also have to mention that it's also like we have this more tendency now to have this narrative art. That art has the function of telling stories, creating more and more and more stories.
Yeah.
So I think
and always has. If you go back, to cave paintings, they're narratives.
Yeah.
If you go, if you look at the huge explosion of art in the Renaissance, the paintings were representing things from stories. So if you go back to classical art, it's representing mythology. So it's always. The big change kind of happened when that with modernism, when it kind of pulled itself free from that and started exploring it in a more abstract way, which is also very interesting. But its base was that, and even in doing that, what was interesting about that whole modernist and postmodernist thing was, or the conceptual art, that you could get it down to just an idea. And one of my favorite artists is Yoko Ono. With partly because of the work she did with John Lennon towards and it just, I think it's just genius what they did together, but also what she did on her own with that kind of conceptual art with the Fluxus movement, whereby you could get it to the point where you just wrote down the idea. and as a philosopher, that really appeals to me because I get those all the time. So the idea is this, and it's like, I'll never realize it, and her whole approach of going, well, that's it. You've done it. It's there. It is. You don't need to. So there's that level of narrative as well, which is really, really kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's what's very satisfying, your answer about this. So,
what is the perfect relationship between art and philosophy?
Yeah.
My response to that is that I think philosophy is about creating an expansive, universal narrative about what this is we're in. And I think art tends to, and at its best often, deals with the particular. It takes that and it focuses in on something, and certainly when it connects through particulars. Because that's where we feel as well as just think. And philosophy tends to be very, very general, and that's why it can be abstract, because it's an overall picture. It's about life. It's not really about Tim's life or Loki's life. But then if Tim expresses it, it becomes that through Tim's life, or that particular thing, or that issue, or that image, or that, and it's the particularness which makes it a complementary thing. I mean, a huge thing for me, I'm not sure it's the answer to this question, but a huge thing for me, the other way round, is that I think spirituality should be much more like art, or I think we should treat spiritual philosophers or spiritual teachers, especially, much more we treat artists. One of the, I hate that kind of the way in which we've adopted an Eastern Indian really model of spirituality, very much where it's like the teacher is elevated. It's elevated and perfect. And what I love about artists, and why really I feel much more kin myself, is they're really not perfect, and their imperfection is as much part of it. We don't expect them to be, we forgive them that, and before and I love that, and that there's an ability which happens in art to be troubled, which in spirituality didn't used to be. If you look at the ancient saints in the West, they were all very troubled, but now it's like, if you're spiritual, you're completely untroubled. And whereas if you engage with the soul, which is what art does, you will be troubled, because the soul is in turmoil. It's not the emptiness. The emptiness is untroubled, but the soul is just full of stuff, and it's full of beauty, and it's okay, so just saying, it touches, and that can transform our experience, and that can, I think, so I think art can play a role in taking us to more emergent states, because it deals with the passivity, it deals with the past. It takes like everything, it can only work with what's there already. So for instance, when we talked about modernism and postmodernism, by taking what had been done before and exploding it, and you can't have the effect of putting a urinal in an art gallery and everyone go fuck until there's an art gallery. Once, because otherwise it's just a urinal. But if there's an art gallery and you put it in there, suddenly it's like, oh wow, you've said something. You've treated that as if it was a work of art, and you've got Dadaism, and wow, you're in a new world suddenly. So everything's about transforming the passivity, but art's doing it on this level of how we perceive. Well, this is quite traditionalist, but I think there is part of it is how we perceive beauty. How we perceive that quality, that ephemeral thing of beauty, and what it is. And then again, what I think's happened in the 20th century. Well, I mean, I had a good friend, an artist, she's dead now, and I always remember she would paint these amazing pictures, really, really like incredibly rich, and months and months and months meticulously painting these images. And they were quite disturbing, really. And I went, because there were people, but she would paint people who had deformities, or they had people who, were had polio and were on masks. And I can remember saying, why? Well, I was quite young then, or younger, and I just said, Fran, why do you paint ugly things? And she just looked at me and went, I don't think they're ugly. I think they're beautiful. And it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. I get exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, I have the same thing. I used to paint very weird faces with very big noses. I have like an obsession of big noses, and I found them beautiful. And everybody come to me and go, "Why you draw ugly faces?" And I respond in the same way. I see them very beautiful. So,
brilliant, perfect, good. Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
Beyond individuality, which is, in my opinion, very overrated in our societies, and this profoundly reflects on how we do and perceive arts. Do you have any vision about individual art as a modern tribal ritual or practice? Great question, and something I'd love to spend time really exploring. The one thing that I came to mind, which I have had, was I do these immersions, Loki, and I really hope that you get to experience it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
What I'm doing is I create I use whatever I've got to hand to create an environment which is enchanted. Kind of makes you feel like, ooh, where am I? Something nurturing, beautiful, safe. I play exquisite music, candles, fairy lights, whatever I've got to hand. And then I have a circle of chairs and I sit people opposite somebody, and you get, without speaking, ideally holding hands or connected physically, you get to gaze into the soul of the person you're with for 2.5, 3 minutes. And then the music will stop and change. Usually people embrace each other, and you move, and then there's somebody else, and then you move, and then there's somebody else, and then you move, and then there's somebody else. And what happens with it is extraordinary, because and then you're through. And I started off doing that in a kind of like spiritual context, obviously, because that's where I've come from. But in the back of my mind, I did it one day in London in an evening, in a big church, but it was a kind of more theatrical space. And we did it just in an evening, but I still did it with a talk at the start, and then we did it, and it was beautiful, but still within my context. But what I've thought ever since then is I thought, I'd really like to do this more like you do an installation. So that, the image I had in mind was you just arrive and you'd be invited to come into silence the minute you walk through the door, and there'd just be chairs, but anywhere, just facing people. And then you'd find a seat, and then there would be instruction to connect in a certain way, and then that would end, and then you'd move, and then you'd be with somebody else, and you'd get connection to connect in that way, and then they'd move, and you'd just do things with people so that they were experiencing sort of this deep connection. But instead of framing it within a spiritual, kind of, you frame it within an art experience. And of course, the person who's already done that, I found out later, is Abramovich.
Marina Abramovich, yeah.
Marina Abramovich, with her, The Artist is Present. But but this is like not just like with the artist, but with each other. And so that's the thing which I've, more like an installation or a happening, or just taking. And I think I really like the idea of taking things out of a spiritual context where they feel a bit dead to me, really, and seeing if they can engage in an art context instead, because art has moved much faster. I mean, in a way, it kind of feels like when everything started to divide off, the humanities, the soul work got really taken over by art. Religion started dying on its feet, and art took over. And really, since religion has, in some cultures, religion has died on its feet, and art has taken on the mantle of being the vehicle through which we explore soul, and it's better often. Okay, so am I doing all right? Is this helpful?
It's very helpful. I want also to comment on this.
Yes.
What you described now. That's also, I have this idea. I want to develop this practice of also taking art out of the art context, and sometimes I'm really annoyed from the making art as a profession. This IST in the end of artist, I really hate it. So yeah, so it's. I have the attempt to also what you describe about this role of the spiritual teacher, and you really like to move it into something very natural, simple, playful. So I want also to develop this within the artist image and what people expect from art. And I noticed that the most important thing for artists is to evoke the inner artist in everybody, because everybody has an artist inside of them. And what you are doing with your book is a form of art, I think. So it's not different. It doesn't have to be visual. Involve people. So I am really impressed in how people act as a tribe when they gather at the campfire and they sing all together. There were no singer that this is the singer and we have to listen to him. We all sing, no matter how my sound and how my voice is good or not. But I will sing. I will express my feelings. I will express my emotions. In our modern society, I think we missed this. We missed this tribal spirit. So I want to really work in this context. And what you describe now has very pleased me because, yeah, you describe it very well.
Fantastic. Great. Yeah, favorite artists, musicians, filmmakers. Well, there's just loads of those. Do you want me to go through them?
Yeah, some of them maybe.
Oh, I don't know. What comes to mind?
You already mentioned Yoko Ono, Fluxus.
I mentioned Yoko Ono. I think with the visual arts, I think my favorite work is the corn circles.
Corn circles?
Yeah. So in the West Country of England and elsewhere, these incredibly intricate designs have been appearing in corn. Have you never seen them?
Oh, no.
Oh, my God, you should Google them. They're a whole phenomenon.
Yeah, I will.
They're happening less now. And the whole mythology that's developed up around them is they're kind of created by beings from other planets, or they're like, it's like that whole thing.
Yeah. Maybe I know. I know what you mean.
and there's something about that where it feels like, wow, this is artists who have gone out, created these incredible images in fields, done it in a way that no one knows how they've done it.
Yeah,
no one
see it from up
no one has seen them do it, and then this whole thing has grown up around it, and they're beautiful, and so that's very appealing. That feels like a whole new thing, and even to the point now where now the groups have come out and said, "Oh, we did it," but they're not believed. So that's interesting. I love that. So that stood out for me. The K Foundation. That stood out for me. That was at the end of the 20th century. The KLF. You're too young, probably. Do you know who the KLF are?
No.
Okay. So the KLF were a rave band. And they had quite a few hit singles as well, actually. Very theatrical. And when they split up, they formed the K Foundation, and they did one piece, which was a film, which was called The KLF Burn £1 Million. And that's what they did.
Oh.
They burnt £1 million, yeah.
Wow.
That was pretty full on. I think that was conceptual art on a hell of a level. And then tried to sell the ashes to art galleries as a work of art. My favourite thing the KLF did, the K Foundation, they call themselves then. What's his name? Drummond is the guy, I think. He's still making it. They did this thing where they had, what's the name of the award? They have an award in, it's a very famous thing in this country for art. It's Christ, what's it called? And I'll think of it. It's a very famous thing, and it's always contentious because the art's it's very modern art. I mean, one of the best pieces that won it ever, I think, was a room in which the lights came on and off. That was it. It's a white room, and it's the lights off, and it's like, oh, and so of course the general public are going, what's that? Anyway, so what the KLF did, which I thought was quite interesting, is they had an award for the worst piece of art, is how they framed it. And the award was twice as much money as you get for the other award inside a see-through box. And they gave it to the same person that won the other award. And the question that they were posing was, is what we've given you art or money? Because if it's art, you should keep it, and it will be worth more money. But if it's money, you should spend it because it will be worth steadily less.
Wow. That's very clever.
So they appeal to me. Alex Gray, I also love, just as a visual artist. I think what he does, where he's kind of painting the energy body, he's kind of painting ayahuasca visions, is amazing. Banksy. I think Banksy makes me laugh, and the idea of someone being that successful for doing graffiti is deeply appealing. I thought his exhibition that I saw, the last two exhibitions of his I saw, were the best exhibitions I'd ever seen. Just absolutely stunning. Clever, and carrying on that kind of postmodern irony, but in a new kind of way, which was actually genuinely interesting. And then loads of musicians. Jesus Christ, so many. Van Morrison. Yeah, I love Van Morrison. He touches my heart. He wakes me up. The early Van Morrison.
Van Morrison?
Van Morrison.
Oh,
Yeah,
Van Morrison. Yeah.
Van Morrison, especially in his 80s and 90s work, just deeply mystical work. Arvo Part, the minimalist composer, beautiful. David Byrne. David Byrne from who ran Talking Heads always surprises me. Always coming up with something new. Always like making me think deeper. And
I will listen to this.
yeah, he's really good. And then films. It's kind of a bit different with films. Films, it's more like films that played a big role in my story. So I would say one of my favorite movies is American Beauty.
Mm-hmm.
The whole movie's brilliant, a beautiful, stunning piece of work, but particularly for the famous plastic bag scene. Do you know the film?
Oh, yeah. Plastic bag scene.
The moment where there's the guy who films everything, but is quite detached and smokes a lot of pot, and the girl who's one of the central characters, and they're together, and he's showing his work, and it's just this monologue about beauty, while this bag just dances in the wind, and he is overcome with emotion at the beauty of it. And it's going to crack me up as I tell you. And then, and there's a moment, so he's writing this vision of this bag and the beauty everywhere, and like, oh my God, there's so much beauty. And she just looks at him and reaches out and touches his hand. And there's something about that scene which is just so, just like so deep. I think it's my favorite moment in all film. It's that particular moment. So I love that. There's lots of others. Dead Poets Society. I love that.
Whoa, yeah, I like this also.
Yeah, marvelous film. Yeah, just gorgeous. Field of Dreams, fairy tales. I like fairy tales. So Field of Dreams is a fairy tale, but a deep one, and I like that. All right, that's enough of that. Do you have in mind any form to collaborate with a group of young artists for a week? What can we achieve together? Well, the thing that came to mind for me was two things. The two things I do, really, which is philosophy and experience. So the experience side is connecting, and the way that, what happens if we really see each other? How does that change how we work together, how we create together, and what we see to create? And then the ideas, I think the whole philosophy of emergence and the nature of the soul and what we're in, I think, if you exploring the vision of what this is and then how you respond to it, and the idea of trying to create genuinely emergent art, what that would be, how you can, and the role of passivity, both as a foundation for the new thing to emerge from, and the role that holds you back, where it's just repeating, and how difficult it is, and exciting to actually find something, and when somebody finds some genuine emergent place, it's just like a thrill. I mean, I talked about David Byrne. I was a musician for most of my life when I was younger, and I remember in 1977 I was listening to big progressive rock music, complex, quite some heavy, but just complex musicianship. And I was in a band. I was very young, 17, 18, playing this incredibly complex stuff and jazz rock, and then somebody gave me in 1977 the album called 77 by David Byrne, and it was like, it was unbelievable. It was the experience. I had never. It was no production. It was cleaned right down. These funny, jerky rhythms. There were songs about food and buildings and psycho killers and like, I don't know what they were about, crazy shit. And yet something was just like a new vision of what music could be. Tiny little short things and everything started. I dumped the whole everything. It just went this. Wow. So that when you hear something truly emergent, it's really such a rush when art does that. It changes your perception somehow. So finding what that could be, that feels like something. happen. So I mean, it's been lovely. It's been lovely just to connect with you.
Thank you so much. I also like to interview you.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely to connect. So I think it's probably the only, you've got now probably the only recording in existence of me talking about art.
Really? Wow.
Probably.